Good morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning forum at First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. A quick note, our forum next Sunday, April 30th, will feature Michael Munson. He's director of Forge Forward, which seeks to build resilience in our transgender communities. And today, we welcome Terry and Bruce Wiggins, well known for their work in social justice goals in our community, and who live their lives which reflect the concerns of the earth. Terry and Bruce stepped up today, this busy Earth Day weekend, to share their commitment to earth-friendly eating. Please welcome Terry and Bruce Wiggins.
Thank you, Lorraine. I think this is a subject maybe whose time has come. We did this presentation at St. Rita Square, our senior living community, a week ago Friday. And since then, we found 3 other articles on the same topic. One in the Outpost magazine has a subject called Waste Not, Want Not, about food waste. And then the Shepherd Express had an article by Virginia Small, our forum speaker last week, called Eating for the Planet. And then a potluck group that were members of Friends of Real Food had the same topic just last Thursday. So this is our take on this whole topic of earth-friendly eating, and Terry's going to get us started.
Thank you. Well, welcome all. I will turn over the floor to Bruce in a few minutes. But what I'll talk about first is what eating low on the food chain means, what eating that way looks like, how I was inspired to become a vegetarian, how it actually happened, and how you can know how to eat lower on the food chain. And finally, I'll go into a bit about what organic means. First, my slide.
Just a minute.
Can you share screen, Mark?
No.
Who is that woman on the screen anyway?
She's from the Holocaust Museum.
So. Go to the next, can you go to the next? I can't, this isn't working to go to the next slide. Okay. And what I want to tell you, first of all, is earth-friendly eating is not about saving Earth, but it's about saving a livable climate for humans. What we're here for today is talk about how you can eat what's good for you and how you can eat your values, as we call it. At our previous church in Kansas City, we held Eat Your Values lunches. We did it about every 10 months, and we served about 160 to 100 people, and we made a profit on it. These lunches were always low on the food chain, organic food, local food, and low waste. So it can be done to eat your values at a reasonable cost. And we'll talk about what these items mean.
It's not going to
Next slide, please.
No.
Oh, do I have to point it there? So first of all, what is a food chain? Well, I could give you an AP biology answer that it's a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy passes one organism eats another, blah, blah, blah. Or we could look at it like this. Here's a picture of a simple land-based food chain. The plant is eaten by the insect, which is eaten by the rodent, which is eaten by the vulture. Or here's an ocean-based example of the food chain. The tiny fish is eaten by the big fish, which is eaten by the bigger fish. And it gets more complicated than these simple chains when we eat a variety of plants and animals that also eat a variety. And the notion of eating lower on the food chain refers to the idea that we eat, on this slide, the smallest fish, or on the previous slide, the smaller animal or the plants.
Next one.
Go back one more. There we go. Okay. My original inspiration to become a vegetarian was the book Diet for a Small Planet that came out in about 1973. But to tell you the truth, it took 30 years for me to actually become a vegetarian. After my daughter had become a vegetarian and I had collected enough recipes that I thought it would be possible for me too, I was concerned about what I had learned from Diet for a Small Planet, but this was it took about 16 pounds of soybeans and grains to feed a cow for each pound of beef that would end up on our table. And if we ate the beans and the grains and legumes directly, the world could feed a lot more people. Though I had no confidence that we could end world hunger. Also, these are pictures of the 10th and 50th anniversary editions of the book. The original edition called for combining various foods of the same meal. Example, corn or rice and beans, which together supplied all of the amino acids needed to make a complete protein. But after the initial edition, the author learned that eating the combinations at the same meal really wasn't necessary. And Americans generally had the notion that we needed to eat way more protein than we actually do. And I would add that I do not see a need for a meat eater to become vegetarian. You can cut down the effect of your eating on the planet just by reducing your consumption of the foods that are high in greenhouse gas emissions that I'll show on the next. For example, you could go meatless on Mondays or reduce the size of your meat serving or just eat more fish and poultry instead of beef. So let's talk about how to do this. So this chart shows how changing your diet can help fight climate change. These are just some of the land-based foods that we could eat. Does anybody want to guess why beef is so high on the list and emits so many pounds of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases?
I guess. Is it because it has a two-part stomach?
Yeah, that's part of it.
Which,
It's partly due
creates
to,
more gas.
yeah. It's partly due to the fermentation in the rumen of the cattle, which comes out as burps. I think a lot of people think it's that they fart a lot. It's not that. It's the burping. And it's partly due to the soy grains that are fed to the cattle, the fertilizers that are used in producing them and transporting the soy and grains and so forth. And it's also due to the expanding consumption of red meat around the world, which requires cutting down forests and plowing them into prairies to grow the cattle feed. And a fourth thing is that it's due to chemicals used to grow the feed and transport the feed and meat. In addition, our preparation methods, that is what goes on in our kitchen, affects the climate friendliness of the food. The more we heat and cook stuff, some say a raw food diet is best, but I don't go that far. So, and though we live in the dairy state, dairy, milk and cheese are pretty high on the list. So we have to consider those factors too, and what we might, if we might cut down on those. Note that some of the items on this chart can be moved up or down depending on the ingredients added to the item. For example, I suspect that white bread releases more greenhouse gas than whole wheat bread because it's more processed. And the processing that goes into it makes a difference. So as to the question of how to know what to do, I received 512 hits when I searched vegetarian cookbooks a couple of weeks ago in the Milwaukee Public Library System catalog. And here are pictures of a few of them. There are books for almost every cuisine, whether you want to eat vegetarian Greek or Middle Eastern or soul food or you name it, Italian, so forth, for every dietary need, whether you need, whether you have diabetes, need a gluten-free diet, need a heart-healthy diet, so forth, and for different types of people too. There are cookbooks for college students, for runners, so forth, for different appliances. If you want to cook something in your multi-cooker, instant pot, or a crock pot, there are cookbooks for those too. And for all the reasons for being vegetarian, whether it's whether you choose to be a vegetarian for environmental reasons or for animal welfare or for your own health. But where I'm getting most of my ideas these days is from the internet, good old Professor Google there. Say I want to make a soup and I have a couple of ingredients. I put in those ingredients in Google and soup recipes, and out they come. So and the next question we want to talk about is, what does organic mean? Well, organic standard was published in 1990, and it means that no artificial fertilizers are used, no genetic modification, no irradiation, and no conventional pesticides. And to be considered organic, livestock must be fed organic feed. And there are different levels of organic food. There's 100% organic, which means the food must contain only organically produced ingredients, or 95% organic. That use ingredients that uses at least 95% of the ingredients that have to be organically produced. And then there are processed products that contain 70% organic ingredients. They can use the phrase "made with organic ingredients." So, and by the way, the little dot that you see up there is the official logo for organic foods. And although there's a black and white edition or version of it too, there are many similar looking labels that are pasted onto food labels in hopes of fooling consumers. So, question?
do you want to have questions?
Sure.
Okay, during. I understand a lot of this, but I don't understand. The no artificial fertilizers, it says the ones made with sewage sludge, do you know what the origin of that is?
And actually,
Are we saying, are you trying to share with us? These things that are organic are always going to be good for the climate. Are there some things here that maybe aren't good for the climate?
well, one of the things that these organic standard has become somewhat problematic in the last few years. It hasn't been updated since it was created in 1990, and it's really due for an update. Because a lot of products have come on the market that are now that can be fed to organic crops that because they weren't listed in the original standard as being prohibited. And so the standard needs review, but it doesn't mean so much in those terms. But you can be sure that you aren't going to be getting a genetically modified product if you go for organic.
I'm gonna cover a little bit about how local is preferable to organic and talk a little more about that when my time comes.
Okay.
Organic is not.
Local, that could be organic, but not certain.
Right,
Okay.
and yeah, and the reason that local food can be organic food but not certified, as Tim said, is that the organic certification process is very, very expensive and probably quite time consuming too, which contributes to the issue that I show on my next slide. Why organic food costs more, because getting certified costs a lot. And organic farms are usually smaller. Controlling pests and weeds is harder without those chemicals that help you do the job or do the job for you. So organic and organic feed for livestock is way more expensive too. And one reason is that organic farms are usually smaller than conventional farms. And so that they yield less, even though the demand for their products is increasing. Small local farmers may not use pesticides or any of the other techniques that would make their food non-organic. And as I said, Bruce is going to talk more about that. And one more slide to go. Here's a chart similar to this. I had to modify it a bit to get it on a slide from the Environmental Working Group, listing the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. The Dirty Dozen are the foods that you really shouldn't eat if they're not organic, because they're heavily laden with pesticides. And the Clean 15 are foods that are okay to eat not organic. And of course, there's lots of foods that aren't listed in either list, and kind of have to weigh it. What you think in terms of price versus potential for eating foods. You'll notice that most of the foods in the Clean 15 have a hard shell or husk or outer peel that is usually removed and we don't eat, and that is where most of the pesticides go. So, and the Environmental Working Group, or EWG.org, puts out this list every year. So updates it using U.S. Department of Agriculture testing data.
And you want to mention the seafood one now too? As a similar sort of help.
Yeah, we have some copies over here on the table of the Seafood Watch.
Go to the microphone.
Yes. Yeah, we have some copies on the table of Seafood Watch from Monterey Bay Aquarium that you can use for finding the best choices, good alternatives, and seafood that you should avoid for, you know, you can take this with you when you go shopping or go out to restaurants. What kind of seafood you want? Bruce.
Good. See if I can get the hang of this now. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the further complexities of this whole question. That is involving our food system. And here I've got a couple pictures of what our food system is or might be depicted. I like the one in the middle that shows up at the top, you've got production, processing, distribution, access, consumption, waste recovery, and hopefully then goes all the way around. So ideally, you've got a circle with your food system here. The one on the right is interesting because it shows it in more of a linear point, but down at the bottom, it's hard to read, but all the arrows down in the bottom point to food waste. And it indicates that waste occurs at each step in each of these processes. And so we've got challenges related to food waste here. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about our food system here. And as we alluded to just a few minutes ago, this is a rule of thumb that Terry and I have come to rely on, and we think it's kind of a basis of what we do. We think that buying local food beats organic. I used to say that local trumps organic, but I don't say that anymore for obvious reasons. Why does local beat organic? Well, there's several reasons. One is because of a concept called food miles. Food often travels a long distance from where it is produced to get to our plate. I'm sure when you go to the store, you've all seen signs that fruit and vegetables come from Mexico or even Chile. Bananas come from Central or South America, and much of our lettuce comes from California. So those are food miles that all that has to travel, and that means pollution. So local avoids some of these long food miles. Buying local helps the local economy, which is a positive good. And the difficulty, I think, really is that you can get industrial agriculture, organic food also. What I mean by that is that you can go to Walmart or Costco or Pick and Save these days and buy organic food, but it's not local. It's still quite often produced with the industrial agriculture methods. Coming a long distance and producing food miles. In truth, I've found that the food miles are a small portion of the actual cost of food if you do the research, but still local and organic is clearly best when you can get it. So we've got this industrial agriculture problem, which is our predominant food system these days. I've got big problems with monocropping, which means huge fields of just one crop. You drive through most states in the Midwest. Iowa Wisconsin, Illinois, and you see huge fields primarily of corn and soybeans. That produces a variety of problems that, related to these other points here. But industrial agriculture uses these huge machines. I'm sure you've seen pictures of the combines and the tractors and planters that all produce emissions and use oil, petroleum products. Nitrogen, and they all involve nitrogen fertilizers. It turns out nitrous oxide is another greenhouse gas emission, and that comes from the nitrogen fertilizer. So the nitrogen fertilizers are a big contributor to climate change, and they're often over applied and then run into our lakes and rivers and cause these big algae blooms that we've seen. Pesticides are needed on these big monocropping facilities, and those are bad for insects, animals, and humans. These huge factory farms are bad for the soil, causing erosion and depletion. And they require antibiotics, particularly in relation to livestock. You've seen these CAFOs, they're called CAFO. It stands for confined animal feeding operations. So you've got these big plants which create huge manure problems. Both you got these now for beef, pork, and chickens. And then the other issue is that our federal policies all support this industrial ag system, which I'll talk about a little bit more. A good book that I've got here. Mark Bittman was the food writer for the New York Times. So he's got a book called Animal Vegetable Junk, A History of Food from Sustainable to Suicidal. And he's commenting that our food system is really suicidal, both for climate change and for our human health. And a couple of good films for those of you who are interested in learning more about this. Is about regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is the practice and name that's being used now as an antidote for industrial farming. So there's a couple of films that are very good. One called Kiss the Ground, another called The Biggest Little Farm. I've done several presentations around the city, including here at church, about Drawdown, which labels itself as the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And Drawdown rates food as the #1 problem sector causing climate change, even higher than use of petroleum. So reduced food waste is the #3 solution they recommend. A plant-rich diet that Terry talked about is #4, and regenerative agriculture is solution #11, with perennial crops, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, is labeled as a coming attraction. So another verification that food is a big problem addressing climate change. So we've mentioned food waste. I've been involved with a task force, city-county task force on climate and economic equity, and I was co-chair of a work group called the Waste and Sustainable Consumption Work Group, and we started studying food waste in Milwaukee. And we found in that first bullet up there, 15% of the materials going to landfills in Wisconsin are food, not food scraps, but edible food. Another half of that, 7% or so, is food scraps. But the problem is that that creates methane because organic materials deteriorating a landfill anaerobically, that means without air, creates methane, which is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And nationally, USDA has documented that about 30% of all the food that is produced is wasted. So USDA has created a goal to reduce food waste 30% by 2030. And labeling is another one of the problems we've got there. Many of us are confused by the labeling at the supermarket when it's got best by dates, sell by dates, and use by dates. And many people think that a best by date means that the food is no good after that and they throw the food away, but that's not what that means. So there is some movement afoot to try to simplify and change these labeling systems. EPA has actually created a food recovery hierarchy to deal with food waste, with up at the top, the most preferred solution is to reduce the source of food waste. Second, feed hungry people. Way down at the bottom is landfill incineration. And there's a little circle about how to reduce food waste, which we'll talk about a little bit more if we've got some time. In terms of eating local, we're fortunate to have a robust local food movement here in Milwaukee. We've got some urban farms in Milwaukee. We've got a lot of community gardens. We've got extensive array of farmers markets. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, where you can sign up with a farmer to get a box each week or every couple of weeks directly from a farm. We have farm-to-table restaurants, a new organization called the Milwaukee Food Council, a group called Friends of Real Food. Trickle Beat Cafe is a pay-what-you-can restaurant that uses local food as much as possible. Pretty amazing to think that we've got a restaurant that's able to make a go of it with pay what you can, but we do. We've got Outpost Co-op. Outpost is probably the best supermarket in Milwaukee for local food. And Walnut Way Conservation Corporation has a national reputation as a neighborhood revitalization program using gardening as the basis of its revitalization efforts. We also have a robust emergency food system with what are often called food pantries. And many of you know the River West Food Pantry near here is now being relabeled the Kinship Community Food Center. The largest food pantries in Milwaukee are operated by the Freedom's Community Ministry. They have 4 pantries in the region. Our church is connected with the Interchange Food Pantry that many of you know. There are senior meals programs at community centers, and of course, we've got 2 major organizations working on food hunger task force and Feeding America in many churches, particularly in the African American community, run food programs. Local and state government is aware of the challenges with food system. I've labeled a number of these efforts here, and I think given the time, I'm not going to run through these now, but I can come back to this during discussion if you want to talk about some of what our city and state government are doing. So far we've been talking about how food affects the climate, but the other side is also true, that climate is starting to affect our food system. We all know about the irregular weather patterns that are coming, storms and droughts, are getting to be more frequent and more severe, and they're quite worrisome. Pests are moving north as the climate change, and one real interesting way of thinking about this is the bottom bullet I've got there. Soon as the climate is changing, the climate of our breadbasket, Iowa, or our corn basket, Iowa, the climate of Iowa is soon going to be in Canada, but Canada doesn't have the soils of Iowa. So it's a very stark way of thinking about how changing climate is going to affect our food. So real quickly to end us up, we want to talk a little bit about what you can do. And Terry wants to go a little bit more into this food circle.
Yeah. At the top of the circle, it talks about planning ahead. And in planning ahead, we encourage you to focus on real food, not processed food, not genetically modified and organic, and of course, local. And remember, you can get your 30 dozen and clean 15 list from ewg.org. Real food also offers benefits in nutrients and flavor, and it often costs less. And we encourage you to look for locally grown food. Farmers markets are often very good for that. And if you can grow it yourself, you're even better. And this on the second bullet, buy what you need, it's also important that you use what you buy. First, you want to finish up?
Okay, I thought you were going to go with the full circle there.
Oh.
That's okay. So buy what you need, use what you buy, store food correctly, cook the right amount, eat it all or store leftovers, and recycle what you can't eat. And of course, recycling in this case basically means composting. So composting is an important thing for especially for gardeners. So your food choices matter. Just to finish up here, your food choices matter. A good start for you in terms of what you can do: eat low on the food chain, eat local as much as possible, reduce food waste, and a suggestion we want to make is to attend Friends of Real Food. It's one of the best potlucks in the city. They met just last Thursday and had a program on food waste, which was really, really good. It's fourth Thursday. Okay, thank you. You're good. Oh, there it is. Third Thursday at the Urban Ecology Center, Riverside at 6 o'clock. For those of you who want it, very appropriate to the message and the sermon this morning, to have a community to address climate change. Well, food community is very important. Friends of Real Food is really a good way of developing community and having a great potluck. So your food choices matter, and system change is needed. We need both, and a good way of talking and thinking about system change is working with a group called the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. The URL is up there, sustainableagriculture.net. This year is a year for the federal government to pass the Farm Bill every 5 years, the federal Farm Bill, which is where not just the food and farm issues are, but also the food stamps and all the nutrition education programs. So if you want to get involved in system change and advocacy for some of the food issues we've talked about, you can sign up to get notices from the sustainableagriculture.net, and they will notify you about when's the right time to contact your federal legislators. So that's our presentation for today. We've got a few minutes for discussion and questions. Mark.
A lot of us in here are fairly old, and I've seen suggestions that people who are older need a lot of protein. So it's not the easiest thing to get a lot of protein, okay, when you're not eating meat. Because it's so much, has so much more protein than other foods. So first of all, in what you've looked at, do we need all that protein? Is that actually true? And then if we do, what would be a good way of getting it?
First, let me respond real quickly. I haven't seen that recommendation
Me neither.
about seniors needing more protein.
Oh yeah, ARP comes out with it, all kinds of different
Really?
places you see it.
Well, I wonder if isn't there sponsors that are saying just because it's a nonprofit doesn't mean it's true. Has anybody else heard that message, Jackie, from ARP?
Consumer health reports. Really?
It's also relationship to specific diseases that elderly might have, that could be from protein deficiency. So each one of us has a little different metabolism. So it's hard to make total general.
Yeah.
My own concern about food is mechanized agriculture. That,
Yeah.
The whole center of the country is now growing corn or soybeans, like you said, and that used to be prairie.
Yeah.
Supporting a whole bunch of diversity.
Well, I think you make a good point, Vince, that maybe we need more protein. I don't know, but stay in touch with your doctor in terms of your own particular situation. People's metabolisms are different. But as we showed in that one, if you care about climate, the big thing to stay away from is beef. You can get other sources of protein, and as Terry talked about, corn, rice, and beans are good sources of protein.
Corn or rice, beans.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard anything about elderly people needing more either. And I have to offer apologies on behalf of both of us that we didn't make the River West co-op.
Oh, yeah, I'm associated with that, and that's I mean, but there's issues with having a small grocery store that you might walk to that doesn't have. If you go into a modern supermarket now, I mean, what I'm hit with is packaging.
Right.
It's like, an incredible amount of waste there, including the ship it. This morning, I'm proud to say that I had pancakes with cherries, which were on the list of the most pesticide that came from the cherry tree in our backyard. Plus maple syrup, which is Wisconsin, but the maple syrup came in a plastic container.
Yes.
So there's multiple things that come together here.
There are.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, this is Vince Bushel, who's resident of River West, one of the founders of the River West Co-op and editor of the River West newspaper. So
It's full of hot air.
good. Mark, did we address your question well enough at this point?
Yeah, and then, I think it needs me more research.
Yeah, okay. I'll look for, like I said, I haven't seen that recommendation for more protein for seniors, but there are multiple ways of getting protein.
You mentioned, greenhouse gases being produced. But the other factor that affects our food system right now is water, and I noticed nuts were way down on the list, but almonds in California are raised using Colorado River water.
Yeah, and lots of it.
And lots of it. So we're lucky here with Lake Michigan.
You need another category.
Water resources.
Yeah, water is an issue, you're right. As well as the pollinators, most of those almonds are pollinated by bees that are brought in from parts of the country.
Immigrant labor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Labor, yes.
Labor too.
Yes.
What about garbage disposals? Are they good or bad?
In the sink.
Yeah.
Well, all that stuff that goes down the disposal in Milwaukee goes to MMSD, and they used to make Milorganite, which Vince alluded to. It's I think the oldest product from sewage systems in the country, going back to the early part of the previous century. And it used to be that you couldn't use Milorganite on food crops because of all the industrial chemicals in Milorganite. It has now been okayed for food products. So unless somebody knows differently, I think that's usable. We've actually had some people suggest that a way of addressing food waste in Milwaukee is to give disposals to people throughout the city. But that has been studied and I think has determined not to be a solution, because if you can't pay for it yourself, in other words, if government or nonprofits have to put it in, it's expensive. And then when they break down, which they inevitably do, they're expensive to fix and people might not know how to fix it. So they aren't a solution for everybody, but I think for many of us, they're really, really useful.
I just thought you asked about garbage disposal in the sewage districts. Why do you put stuff in your garbage disposal? Because that helps their finished product more and be of better quality. So it's recycled. And they take methane from the dumps, which when you put yourself in, if it comes, methane released into the air is bad for the climate. They used an old pipe, and there's a pipe that takes it from the dump on Waukesha County or something, and takes it all over to the lakefront. And they use that to power the air that's flowing into make the sewage decompose faster. And that creates carbon dioxide, which is still a greenhouse gas, but with less impact than methane.
Yeah.
So we're using methane from our waste to power our sewage system, save money doing it, and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide.
That's a good point. And so we're lucky to have MMSD here. That's not a solution for everywhere, but here in Milwaukee, we're lucky to have MMSD.
They get their finger pointed at a lot, but they're one of the best sewage treatment systems in the country.
Other comments, questions? Make sure you get to the service downstairs if you haven't been there yet. It's a wonderful Earth Day service and great message and wonderful music. And please go if you haven't gone yet. Thank you.
Over here, we have copies of Green American.